Hello, everyone. Welcome. As you may know, my name is Marcus Weakley. I'm the director of the Center for Writing and Rhetoric at Claremont Graduate University. I have with me today a wonderful consultant. Anisha, do you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Anisha. I'm a PhD student in cultural studies, and I'm a writing consultant at the Center for Writing and Rhetoric.
Yep. And today we're going to be talking about creating writing plans. So our plans for today are to begin with the rhetorical situation, something which you heard a little bit about if you were at our recent webinar and research papers, but we'll touch on it again briefly as a helpful idea, a theoretical concept as to how to consider the different elements that go into, pretty much any speaking or writing situation. From there, we'll talk about the SMART goals method, I guess you can call it, of how to break down a goal into different parts through the SMART specific. Well, you'll hear more about it, measurable, some key elements. And then after that, we'll talk about the chunking method, which, is nicely symbiotic with SMART goals. So we're providing these two as two, related but slightly different approaches that can easily be combined together to approach really almost any graduate level assignment or task, but also, apply to what I like to think of as like those middle to long range projects, which you'll find that writing plans are especially helpful for. So things like end of term papers and post-coursework milestones. So I'll begin with the rhetorical situation. Traditionally, in the initial theoretical formulation, it was comprised of purpose, context, audience, voice, and genre. So from there, there have been a few different formulations of the rhetorical context, the rhetorical situation, but more or less the overall idea is to think of the relationship between you, the writer or speaker, or your group, if it's a group presentation or a group writing project, your audience, so the intended people who are going to be listening to or reading the work, and then the subject, the topic that is being written or spoken about. So those three elements do not exist in a vacuum, right? And the different factors that go into forming those three key elements are not static. So there's this kind of dynamic relational situation occurring that changes depending on what those elements are and what some of the other elements are in this formulation. So purpose is one of the key ones, and that's related to the topic and the audience in many ways. So what is the assignment? Is it, a personal essay, a literature review, a research paper, a thesis, dissertation? And why are you writing about or speaking about the topic that you are, right? So there will be kind of like a purpose that's coming from you as the speaker or writer. And then there will be a purpose that you're trying to get from the audience as well, right? So something you're trying to persuade them of. And both of those are usually related, but oftentimes slightly different. And then there are different layers of purpose too, which we could talk more about, but you have that, and then you have the context, right? And that context is, what are the requirements and stakes, right? There are going to be higher and lower stakes contexts across graduate assignments. So if this is a personal reflection leading up to a personal essay, that's, let's say, like a midterm assignment, and the personal reflection is due the second week of class, that's going to be a lower stakes assignment compared to that midterm personal essay that is due halfway, that is supposed to build ideas towards a final research paper. at the end of the semester, which is going to be the higher stakes assignment. So that context is important. What's even more important, and the context kind of encompasses a lot of this dynamic, including the purpose and then the audience, right? So who is the reader or the intended reader? Is it going to be just your professor and maybe your classmates, which is really the typical circumstance of undergraduate writing? Or is it going to be, at that time, really your professor's the only one reading it, and maybe your class, but they're pushing you to enter that scholarly conversation, which is what occurs in graduate writing a lot more. So it's going to be a question of your reader might actually only be your professor, but your intended reader in the way that you write the piece should be the larger scholarly conversation. Voice tone is important. And this is something we actually, talk about a good deal through our anti-discrimination commitments as well at the center, but there is a certain tone and a certain expectation on the side of the audience in terms of how the information should be presented, not only structurally, but which is more the genre, but stylistically, like what kind of vocabulary is used, the phrasing, style of phrasing, those sorts of things. And tone is something you'll learn about the more you read within the discipline, but then also something that we like to, at a certain point, allow, or maybe not, I want to say push, but, encourage folks who come into the center, for example, to use their own voice in this tone and to contribute to the scholarly conversation through using their own voice, as well as the expected tone of their discipline. And, again, genre. So that ties into the voice I was just talking about, definitely the context and the purpose. And the genre is going to be the set conventions in a field that are then expected by your audience, by your reader, and is oftentimes going to be, kind of the moves or the structure that your expression, the expression of your understanding or knowledge or research in the field is going to be judged upon, right? So your ability to meet the established genres within your discipline are often going to be, required through coursework to show that you can do the things that are necessary within the field. Part of the work, again, that we do at the center is some of those are quite unwritten. You know what I mean? Like, you're not explicitly taught the different stages of a literature review. It's kind of assumed that the more literature reviews you read, the more easily you're going to be able to write literature reviews, right? So we try to make a lot of those unwritten rules, let's say, and in this case, talking about them as conventions, stylistic, structural conventions. We're trying to make those rules really explicit, right? So here are the moves of a typical introduction. Here's how a literature review works. Here's how you integrate sources, those sorts of things. That's a lot of the work of the Graduate Writing Center. So how does this apply to writing plans? Well, the rhetorical situation helps provide the sense that once you take into account what type of assignment you're working on, who your audience is, what the structural, genre-based expectations, requirements are, you will, with that understanding, create a different type of writing plan, right? Through either the SMART or the chunking method. And I think Anisha will tell us a bit more about how that applies specifically to the SMART goals.
Great, thank you. So the rhetorical situation flows well into thinking about SMART goals. So SMART goals here is an acronym that kind of shows how we break down each form of these goals, which I'll go over, but it becomes a useful way to create a writing plan and really set up a goal setting system for yourself. So there's a lot of useful things about SMART goals. One of them is that it helps you think about the long-term and the short-term goals and assignments. So Marcus mentioned this, but you're going to be dealing with contextualizing your goal setting to whatever assignment you have or whatever context you have. So if you have an argumentative paper due at the end of the semester versus a personal essay due in the middle of the semester, you're going to be breaking down those assignments into different types of short-term and long-term goals for yourself. So SMART goals is really a useful goal setting system in order to kind of address these different forms of assignments. And what's great is that you can really contextualize it and adjust it to whatever assignment that you have. So just to quickly go over what SMART stands for, and we'll be going into each one. You want to make sure that your goals and your system of setting goals and your writing plan are as specific as possible. So you're going to start with setting up your general objectives for completing whatever goal or assignment or project you're going to be working on. And then you also want to make sure that all of your goals are measurable and achievable. So in this sense, when you're developing your short-term goals, you want to make sure that you can quantify what you're doing, how many pages, how many components of the assignment, and that these are achievable and realistic goals that you can accomplish for yourself. This part about achievability is really important because especially for those of you that are just starting at CGU, graduate school and the stresses of graduate school are a big load. And so SMART goals kind of help you address every single thing going on in your life, everything going on in terms of your graduate form of study, and being able to think about each assignment specifically and what you can achieve in certain amounts of time. In, again, relation to the rhetorical situation, your goals and your goal setting need to have a form of relevance to your assignment, to your audience, whatever context you're writing in, and to make sure that your goals fit in with that type of context. And lastly, it's really important to work through goal setting in terms of, a timed process and a time-bound process. So in creating a writing plan, obviously there is the timed element that happens both in short-term and a long-term manner. So I'll go over each of these in more specific detail, but essentially SMART goals here is a method to think about creating a writing plan that helps address, the context of your assignment, as well as the context of how you need to approach the assignment in a useful way for yourself and the types of goals that work for setting up goals for yourself. So the first component of SMART goals is the importance of specificity in your goals. So this first component is about setting up general objectives for yourself. It is about understanding every component of your assignment and being able to outline everything that you need for setting your goals. So this is really the first step in setting out what types of goals you're going to need to accomplish. And that helps for later on breaking down those goals and being able to accomplish them throughout your semester or throughout your time in graduate school. So you can think about these W's as the components of how you approach setting up specific goals. So what objectives need to be accomplished? So here you can think about what the assignment is. Is it a personal essay? Is it a literature review? Are you thinking about a larger dissertation project or a master's thesis? What types of objectives do you need for completing these projects? And what types of projects are they? In terms of a personal essay, your objectives may be a little bit different than building an argumentative paper. Something simple is when are the due dates? And this goes into the official due dates that are set up for you, as well as the soft deadlines that you're going to be setting up for yourself. You want to also keep in mind any types of due dates, such as if you're working on a semester paper, your professor might be asking for something midway through. So all of these deadlines are important to note down before you start breaking down what your kind of smaller goals are. So the next one is thinking of who is the audience? Is this a group project? So who is involved in developing this project? So if you're singularly writing this paper by yourself, it's important to note that if you're writing it with other people, or if you have other people involved in interacting with your project through either peer review or responding to your work. Is your professor reading it? Is this involved within a larger committee? So all of these things are going to adjust how you set up your goals in terms of any types of, again, deadlines, the type of voice that you need to present, understanding who is reading your paper, and also understanding, the workload going into setting up these goals. And then lastly, thinking about, where is this project being presented? Again, what is the context of this project? Are you presenting this project to the public in a classroom, in a conference? Is this going to be situated in a journal? Or is this simply a semester paper that you're turning in to your professor? So thinking about as many details as you can is really important for this part of the goal setting system and SMART goals. And the suggestion here is that once you think of all of these details, you can outline them and list them out. And then that'll help as we move on to the next part of the goal setting in terms of taking these bigger objectives and then breaking them down into smaller parts. So this ability to make measurable and achievable goals, it starts with building those specific outlines and listing out everything you need to do. And doing that, you can start to determine what smaller goals you can kind of set for yourself in terms of building your writing plan. So measurable refers to building quantifiable goals in accordance with thinking of due dates. So this is really about making sure that every component of your goal setting you can quantify in a certain way. So if you have an argumentative paper or semester paper due in 15 weeks, then understanding what you need to accomplish in a certain amount of weeks, how many pages you need to accomplish, how many sources you need, all of these things you can quantify as much as possible are going to help you determine what goals you can list down and what's properly achievable for you. Once you start to quantify those goals, you can also set specific deadlines and due dates for yourself. So in addition with setting these hard deadlines that have been provided to you, SMART goals make sure that you're setting these softer deadlines for yourself. So this can either be setting up some type of weekly routine, and in addition, it can be finishing up things by a certain date to make sure that you meet the longer term deadline. So these forms of thinking of quantifiable goals can happen in multiple ways. So you can think about it in terms of your writing style and writing kind of goals and types of achievements you would like to accomplish. So I'll write one paragraph a day, or I'll write for an hour every day. So these are two different ways of quantifying what goals you can achieve. Some people work better in terms of thinking of the amount that they're writing, while others work well in terms of thinking that of the times that they're writing during the day. So being able to quantify that in a way that works well for you is part of developing these measurable goals. And then if that doesn't really work for you, you can also think about the actual content of your paper. So I'll collect 10 sources or 15 sources by mid-semester, or I'll be able to build an abstract and an argumentative paper, those two parts by a certain point in the semester. But either way, you want to develop a way to quantify the amount of goals that you have and what you can accomplish. Being able to determine quantifiable goals makes them also realistic goals for yourself. And you want those two things happening in accordance with one another. So you can think about ambitious goals versus realistic goals. So I'll write 3 pages every day so I can finish my paper 5 weeks early. That may be a little ambitious for you. Rather than maybe thinking I'll average, 4 pages a week to meet my deadlines, or 2 to 4 pages a week. Thinking of realistic goals is about scaling back whatever kind of ambitious goals you might want to accomplish, rather than thinking of finishing your paper, 5 weeks early, maybe giving yourself only a couple weeks early, and really understanding your writing process, as well as everything going on in your life as well. If you're going to conferences, if you have 2 other classes that you're taking, all of these things need to be kept in account when you're setting up these goals. Building achievable goals is also important in terms of being able to measure your own types of success in writing. So it also, you can take this moment in the SMART goal method to really, time your progress, to reflect on what you're able to accomplish. If a few weeks in you realize you're doing, more than you've set for your goals, you can adjust your goals to match that. So these two components really allow you to break down your goals in ways that are easily achievable for you, and also help you kind of build confidence in your writing plan as well. And the last two parts of SMART goals are about relevance and the time-bound component of your goal setting system. So relevance really connects to that rhetorical situation. How does your paper respond to the prompt and context? This is thinking about your audience, the purpose of your paper, where you're presenting it, making sure that it fits within the guidelines and requirements of what you're doing. This is also kind of a moment to check in with the conventions of your discipline, the conventions of your genre, the citation style you need to be accomplishing or kind of fitting into. All of these things are important in making sure that your goals appropriately fit into what the assignment is and what your project needs to be. This also helps you overall kind of prioritize what you need to do in terms of your assignment. So if there's anything that's not really relevant to your work, or anything that's maybe overdoing it, getting too many sources, you can cut that out to focus on what you really need for setting up your goals. And then lastly, one of maybe the most important parts, of course, in creating a writing plan is the timeliness of your goals and how you are planning out what you want to achieve. So this goes into setting short-term and long-term deadlines for yourself, but really starting with that end goal in mind so that you can set up your pacing properly as you move on throughout the semester or the next couple of years in whatever project you're working on. So thinking about the timing, that kind of goes into the long-term deadlines that you have set by either your committee or your professor. That can be mid-semester or even longer than that, as well as setting up some short-term deadlines for yourself in terms of the components of your paper and when you want to accomplish those forms of your paper. And timing also goes into the more specific quantifiable components as well. How long are you going to spend writing the first 10 pages of your paper? How long are you going to write each day? So thinking of time and the amount of time you're spending on your goals goes into that specific, daily work mode, as well as your short-term goals each week, each month, and then your kind of long-term goals for the longer duration of your assignment. So with this combination of setting up the outline of your kind of overview, of setting up measurable and achievable goals, and then leading into making sure that they're contextual and time-bound, you can set up a writing plan that is specific to your work life and your needs, as well as the assignment. And it's also very manageable throughout your process. And SMART goals, lastly, kind of offers you an ability to build confidence in your writing and be able to kind of mark down your accomplishments throughout your goal setting, and being able to have that momentum to continue throughout accomplishing and finishing up your assignments.
Awesome. Thank you, Anisha. So in talking about the chunking method, I just wanted to again kind of tie in with the SMART goals to say that, there's going to be some overlap between these two approaches. They're definitely not mutually exclusive, that sort of thing. They can, our idea here was to, show these two options for spending some time up front to save you time in the long run, right? So you do some planning in a flexible way early on that hopefully over the course of a semester will end up by putting in that planning, and then by, in both cases, some sort of iterative process of reevaluating those plans as you go along. It saves you time in the long run, right? And so there's a lot in both of these that are very similar. And I see it as being, the sort of thing that you can either take on a SMART goal approach. You can maybe just do this chunking method if you want to, because there's a lot there that's very similar, or you can, do some adaptation in between. So I don't understand. I see. Sorry, I often set off my Siri on my watch, and it usually happens during workshops. I'm not sure why. All right, so chunking method. The idea here is to break down. So this is typically a productivity method, or it was initially, and the idea here is to adapt it to a writing plan. So it's taking a larger goal, right? Something that's typically due some time off, and breaking down this larger goal into smaller chunks in an intentional, targeted way to set yourself up with a number of signposts along the way to meet those smaller goals, knowing, having the confidence that those smaller goals are designed to be steps along the way of meeting the larger goal, right? So you can do some initial planning up front in enough detail and in the sort of way that that even though I can't see the final product now, or maybe in meeting some of these, what we'll end up talking about as tasks, these smaller tasks, you might not be able to see how they end up, maybe painting the final picture or something along those lines. But given the design time you put in earlier on, you know that these are leading up towards that final goal. One of the ideas, two of the ideas really behind this is to reduce procrastination, right? Because there is a tendency, especially when you've got the setup of a lot of graduate school courses where you'll have major assignments due at the end, right? And if you're taking 3 classes, you'll have that times 3. So you'll have a big grouping of work all due around the same time. And it's easy in the first month, second month of courses to kind of feel the distance of those deadlines. And then suddenly, they seem a lot closer, and there are multiple of them. And there's this interesting thing that occurs cognitively where suddenly the stress and anxiety of that situation actually increases the delay of doing something to the point where procrastination snowballs a bit, and then you've just got a lot to do at the very end. So this method reduces procrastination, and it does it by creating, as Anisha talked about with SMART goals, these really realistic, smaller tasks that can be accomplished along the way that will add up to, the final project. And by accomplishing them over a longer period of time, and as we'll talk about, maybe staggering them across courses, you'll make progress. And even though the way things work out in graduate school, to some degree, some of the work can't be done probably until the last month, you'll still be in a better position to reduce that just last minute. I'm going to wait till the adrenaline kicks in because I've procrastinated this long. And then they help with writer's block. And this is because of, again, a chunk of writer's block just occurs because of stress and anxiety. And then a lack of feeling of accomplishment and momentum from enough instances of sitting down to attempt to get work done, and work doesn't happen. So the situation kind of expands, right? Where the more often that occurs, the more likely it is that you're going to sit down and not get work done because you've set your, it's difficult to break out of that lack of momentum. And you're unsure how to do it. And the stress and anxiety increases because the deadline is approaching. And all of that just makes it worse, right? The added stress and anxiety makes it even harder to get the work done. So this breaking down into smaller parts is a productivity method as well, because it it makes it more difficult to encounter writer's block, more or less. So think of this as a working backwards. You're going to do a reverse scheduling or reverse engineering of a final project, and you're going to utilize 3 main reductions of that final piece. So you're going to do an initial chunking exercise that I like to think of as sections. And sometimes these will be well defined for us within a genre, within the genre that we were talking about before with the rhetorical situation. So, and other times these sections might be neatly defined by the writing process, okay, itself. So let's use a literature review as an example. A literature review in the social sciences often for, let's say it's a final assignment. So you're looking at about a 10 to 15 page literature review. That will usually have, as a genre, that will have structurally an introduction of about a page to 2. Then it will have 2, sometimes 3 level 1 headings, like larger sections, or level 2 headings actually in APA, like larger sections, right? Those are the main themes from the literature. And then within those themes, there are sub-themes. So there will be maybe debates about certain topics. There will be a subtopic or 2 that needs to be addressed, maybe 1 or 2 key pieces of research that kind of deserve a couple of paragraphs of summary and discussion. And then there will be a conclusion, typically a paragraph or 2. So if it works out for you, you can do this initial chunk in those sections, okay? You can have an introduction as a chunk, the first major theme, the second major theme, and the conclusion, let's say. And you can think about those as that initial section, the initial creating into those larger sections. Or you can think about the writing process. In order to write a successful literature review of this type, you're going to have to review at least 15 sources, let's say, for this type of end of semester assignment. You're going to encounter a lot of new information. There's going to be reading and summarizing and note-taking, the creation of an annotated bibliography, possibly something we talk about a lot as a writing process tool. I really love this thing called the source matrix or synthesis matrix, which is a great way to organize information, to analyze it in terms of thematic elements, which help you then outline and structure a literature review. All of that occurs oftentimes before you've written, the words of the actual literature review that you turn in. After that kind of pre-writing type process, outlining as well as the pre-writing process, if you do that sort of thing, then you kind of get into the actual writing of the text. And through that writing, hopefully you receive some feedback, either through visiting the center, through your instructor, through peers, and then there's a revision process, right? And editing, revision being a review of the higher order concerns of structure, coherence, clarity of expression of ideas, and editing being ensuring that your grammar is solid and your formatting is correct and all your citations are correct. So that is like a writing process approach where you're thinking longitudinally or like over time. Here's a chunk. I'm going to chunk, a major chunk is going to be finding, reviewing, and summarizing the sources. And then here's another chunk is organizing them. Then another is a first draft and then a revision, something like that. Different ways of approaching this, but the idea is to start bigger and then to break those down into smaller chunks. If you've got each section of the literature review, you're looking at what are my subsections, subsection 1, 2, 3, subsection 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, that sort of thing. And then you're thinking about breaking those down. And then finally, those medium chunks get broken down into tasks, straightforward, manageable tasks. So this is a handout that we've developed to kind of help guide through this. And I'm actually just going to jump over to this document because I feel like it's helpful to look at for this. Can I make this bigger? Hopefully this is, let's see. Hopefully it's big enough. What's the final deadline? Start with that endpoint. Then you think back, you want to give yourself time to produce a draft. Give yourself a day at least to leave it, come back to it, reread it with at least a day of time to have some fresh eyes, look over it, make some changes. Okay, you at least want to give it that sort of pass at the minimum. Ideally, a few days and at least one, maybe two, like, revision editing passes. Then you want to think about, those larger sections that I talked about. You would just kind of list these. Again, I think it's helpful to think of it either in terms of your writing process or in terms of the structure of the final product. Then from that, you want to break down into those smaller chunks, okay, as we see in number 4 here. And this is, of course, going to be relative to the assignment and to how you want to approach this chunking method. Number 5 is the most important. So this is giving you really specific tasks that after you've gone through this writing plan to some degree, you will have the confidence of knowing that, I've got tasks 1.1, 1.2 here. There are going to be more. In order from what started as section 1, chunk 1, a task that needs to be done within that, which is actually technically task 1.1.1, but that just seemed too much for the handout. You're probably going to have 5 tasks, let's say. Okay. Here's where it's helpful. Okay. The initial list is intimidating if you do go through this process. There's an alternative way of doing it, which is kind of called the brain dump method, the idea of a brain dump. I actually do this with creative writing, where I just kind of like brain dump any kind of creative ideas I'm having on a topic or a place or a thing that I'm trying to develop. It works here as well, where you just brain dump everything you need to do for this literature review that you can think of. So you spend a good 20 minutes just every idea that you can think of that needs to go into this. And then you use that as kind of an initial starting point to think of it in terms of sections and smaller sections and tasks. The key here is that when you start to consider 6, and this applies for the SMART goals too, thinking about when you are most productive, in what environment, right? You want to start to have the material that 5 provides you, those tasks, to be able to plug in to your life at the times that, as you learn more about yourself and your writing process, as you self-assess more, you will be more likely to accomplish that task at a certain time, and you'll also feel more productive, right? So some of these tasks are bound to be lower stakes, if we're going to use that same sort of terminology. It's going to be things like formatting, citations, which are important, but usually cognitively less demanding than doing synthesis writing or tying your evidence to your main assertion, your main claim in argumentative writing. Those are cognitively more demanding tasks, right? And those should be, if you've gotten to the point of tasking out a project, you can leave those for, I know I work best between 8:30 and 11 a.m. That is when I write best, just because I'm forced to wake up in the morning. I have a 9 to 5. If I was able to stay up late, I would probably be able, sleep in. I could probably write in the middle of the night. But with the way I am right now, 8:30 to 11, that's when my brain is sharpest. That's when I get the best writing done. So I would, in this process, schedule in, I know I've got a block from 8:30 to 10 on this day. what I'm going to do is I'm going to plan to do task 3.2 because I know that's really challenging for me. And knowing that about myself, and this is a good time for me, I'm going to plug it in here. I'm increasing the chances of me being successful, making some progress during that time on one of the more challenging tasks. And then I know I have another block between 3 and 4. I've got an hour there. I'm going to be tired. I've been, hustling all day. My brain's not as sharp, but you know what? I can watch that video on APA formatting on YouTube and be sure that I'm meeting, the length of the margins, and I've got my all caps on my sections and the sorts of things that you need to really have that polished final product. They're all a part of it, right? But these tasks require more or less of me. What will happen though is that all of them build up towards this really strong final product. And they also reduce the chances of both writer's block and procrastination because you're building your momentum, right? You're making progress. You're not only actually being productive, you're feeling productive. Super important on long projects like theses and dissertations, but definitely important for things like seminar papers too. So this helps you take advantage of the time you do have available so that ideally things are sustainable, right? You're not either, putting too much on yourself. By going through this process, you've gotten nuanced enough to start to think about when you do have time available here and there, and then when you're more likely to be successful or not. So you're not going to give yourself really challenging 3-hour-long tasks on Sunday evening or something along those lines when you're just not up for it. And then you'll feel discouraged. And the next time you sit down, that task will be just as hard, if not harder type thing. You're trying to create the framework for you to be successful. And this handout is just kind of designed for you to kind of walk through that, right? That's what 6 does, the most difficult tasks. Here are the hardest parts of getting this done. Therefore, I'm going to schedule to do them at my most productive time and place. I think environment's important too. I write better at cafes. Or at this desk that I'm sitting at now. I need to have music on. Like those sorts of things are helpful to know. I don't waste as much time. I put the music on, I sit down at a place that I know is going to work. And even if I'm tired, like something starts to happen. It might not be my best, but it's better than it would be otherwise. And then what tasks need to be accomplished? For sometimes you just need to, you need to do that reading and annotating before you can do the synthesis writing of the literature review. Sometimes you're just bound by certain parts of an assignment before others. And that's helpful in this degree of planning. And then you just want to maybe set some tentative dates, which we saw as well with the SMART goals. But I'm going to have everything read by this day for the literature review. I'm going to have the annotated bibliography done by, or I'm going to have my themes developed, and I'm going to ask my professor if these themes work for the assignment. Some sort of goal along those lines along the way. And if you meet it or you're close, you're within a week, something like that, it feels really good, right? You feel like you're on your way. So jumping back to the PowerPoint, we included a few kind of just more general self-assessment things to do about your writing habits that can really help writing plans. And I talked about some of these. And I also do a time management and creating a productivity system webinar, which we have on our YouTube channel. That also asks you to do this in a little bit more depth to kind of assess the habits that you have now, to think about when you're productive, to think about when you're not, and to start to, with that knowledge, use it to create sustainable practices, not just practices, but things that you can integrate into your life so that the demands of graduate school, which are high, don't take you away from your, the relationships that matter to you, the hobbies that are important to you, the things that help you feel good, I don't know, whatever those might be, exercise, music, travel, the beach, the sorts of things that are really important for the sustainability and for the accomplishment of the long-term goals. So, thinking about how often you write. Do you write every day, once a week? What type of settings work best for you? How can these fit into your habits and preferences? And, there's a wide range, and you don't have to write every day. You don't, even some people do write really well, waiting until the end. So, take all of this with a grain of salt, really learn about yourself, see what works for you, and then build out a writing plan, that fits into the demands of your life, of the courses you're taking, the assignments that you have, the products you have to produce, plus what you know about yourself and your own process. We've got a few things that we've designed to kind of, help with writing process. The first is our Canvas site, which has modules that have videos, handouts, explanations, examples to help work through various topics. We're adding more currently, and I think doing one on writing plans is definitely going to happen, hopefully soon, within the next few months probably. But, we're adding to this all the time, and it's a great resource. I will be sending out this PowerPoint to everyone who registered for the webinar. So you'll be able to get a link right to this, but you can also visit our website, and it's clearly labeled on our homepage. Another is the online resources section of our website, which has all of the handouts on the modules plus more, broken down topically. So we have a lot of handouts there, and our YouTube videos will be there as well. So the center itself can be a helpful tool in this. And Anisha, do you mind maybe talking a little bit about the work we do at the center?
Sure. So we have a lot of resources at the center, a lot of great people working at the center. We offer writing consultations. I've met some of you in them. So we have in-person, online, and email. Now we are in hybrid mode, so you do have the option of picking in person or online for the people who are available for that. You can also submit papers over email, and you'll receive some responses. That's our email review system. We also hold events. So if you go to the website that Marcus showed, you can register for events and see the list of them. We have dissertation boot camps, students of color retreats, writing retreat, qualifying exam events. And as you can see, we have workshops and webinars throughout the center. We also have new writing studios that are being offered, where you can kind of just do drop-in hours. Marcus is working on the big pitch, of course, and he already linked to the online resources. So those are all the things we have going on. You can check it out at the website, and yeah.